Hi, everybody, and today we have a very special guest, John Holmstrom, who is so famous in the punk era and up to now. And I want to mention a couple of things before we get into John. John, I first got introduced to working on one of the most famous album covers, Road to Ruin. And there's a step-by-step process, but John ended up doing the finished artwork for this cover, which was printed originally with a silver and a four color, and one of the most famous punk covers, as you know. Um, he's also, we both together did a Road to Ruin punk poster, which was in a 400 poster show at the Museum of Arts and Design. And that cover is in the MoMA permanent collection. And I want to also mention the Ramones covers in the Rock and Roll Archival collection with our name credits on both pieces. John was profiled in our Creating Comics book, which profiling top cartoonists. He is, of course, he was the famous editor of Punk magazine, so famous in the punk era, author of the famous punk book. And he was also a guest on our Howl Gallery show in 2017. It was a show about me and Judith showing our work, and John was a focus in our life with Sylvia Reed, and he explained actually doing the finished art for Road to Ruin. And it's a very great event. I also want to show you Punk magazine, which is very famous for it, the front cover illustration, and also inside of many different things. But John could go over all that stuff. Maybe you could start off, John. What do you want to start off with in your life? Just as talking about.
Uh, well, the Road to Ruin. I guess we start with that.
Yeah.
Do you remember when that went to the printer there, Spencer? Do you have the date?
1978. I remember you coming in. John Gillespie, the art director, showed me multi overlays, John, of plastic overlays with register marks to be sent into the printer. It looked like a very intricate job, but I know there are several people right in line till you do the finished artwork, right? The sketch getting to the finish, right?
Well, I worked from a sketch.
Yeah.
It was by Gus McDonald. He gave it to the Ramones at backstage in Scotland, and then they wanted me to redraw it with Marky instead of Tommy, and a bunch of other changes. You can see the original drawing, especially if you get the box set of Road to Ruin. Now it has the whole story.
Right.
Basically, though, they tried other illustrators to redesign the original's fan sketch.
Oh, really? Wow.
And they couldn't get it done, and they came to me with like 1 day before it was due and begged me to take it over. And I was like in the middle of trying to get the latest issue of Punk magazine to the printer.
Oh, my God.
And of course, it was the Sex Pistols on the cover. So there was always this like, whose side are you on? The Ramones or the Sex Pistols? Like you couldn't be on both, right? I like both.
Yeah.
So, I had to stay up all night to try to get this thing done, and I didn't have time to do a proper color separation on it.
Wow.
I mean, I had to get to the office at like 9 in the morning, and there I am at 6 in the morning, and I got to color the thing, right?
Of course, I wasn't told all this insanity that was going on with you in the making. I wasn't told the insanity by John Gillespie. He just showed me those overlays, and I said, "Oh my God, that's intricacy!" Now to do all that stuff in those short hours, wow, it's amazing to me.
Well,
very meticulous.
I delivered the job.
Yeah.
And Johnny and Dee Dee hate it.
Really?
They don't like the way they look. I had to redraw the faces. So
really?
They're telling me, oh, it's got to be at the printer tomorrow. And then it took another couple days to get there.
Jeez.
Wow. I had to like redraw the faces so it looked less like them and more like a boy band.
Wow. And
I
of
mean,
course
back
you
then,
were,
the Ramones still thought they could be mainstream rock and roll pop group, you know?
yeah, the thing I got to mention, there was a big Ramon show at the Queens Museum, and a lot of your stuff was in there. That was an incredible show, right, John?
Yeah, I did a lot of work with and for the and about the Ramones. I had a great show at that 72 Gallery on Orchard Street, 72
Mm.
Orchard, and it put together everything I ever did with the band. It
Wow.
was huge.
Wow.
But we were going to do it in Munich, but the COVID took my baby away.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a long way back to Germany.
Mm. But the Queen show, that traveling show to the Grammy Museum, that was a big show. You had some beautiful cartoon artwork, I know, in the promotional pieces. And you had a lot of stuff in there. And that was a huge show, the Queens, you know. Um,
Yeah, I did this map of the Ramones history,
yeah.
and I put the pinhead on it. It looked a little bit like Rocket to Russia, but it was a map of New York City, and it showed all the landmarks, like where Forest Hills is, because you know
Mhm.
not many people know New York City that well. Like, where
Yeah.
is Forest Hills?
Right,
It
right.
turns out, I find out, it's a upper middle class neighborhood.
Right.
Like Joey Ramone grew up in a building with a pool on the roof. Well,
That's a
no
good.
wonder he could afford to play drums. Nobody I knew could afford a drum kit
Right.
back in the day. But I think his mom did okay, and she was very supportive of Joey's career. I mean,
Wow.
she would go to shows.
Yeah.
Charlotte was a really wonderful mom to both Joey and his brother Mickey, who's also had a pretty cool career in music.
Also, talking about what you just mentioned, also Rocket to Russia. Tell us about that. You did some artwork on there. I think the back
Yeah,
cover and
Rocket to Russia was a lot of fun for me, even though it was another, like, can you get it to us in 3 days job.
yeah.
Um, Johnny came to me and asked me to put together images for each song on Rocket to Russia.
Mm.
And I didn't have much to work on, just the name, just the song titles. So I put together some sketches for me, and I had a photo shoot done. Joey Ramone and Roberta Bailey and I did bought a cow brain for teenage lobotomy. We did the photo shoot. It happened on Elvis Presley's uh, death date.
Mm.
We went to CBGB's afterwards and heard the news.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a crazy time. But Johnny looked everything over. He said, "No, you draw everything.
Mm.
I want you to draw everything, all the songs." And I was like,
Wow.
"Wow!" But I have 3 days of drawing.
Another one.
And he liked it so much. Then he said, "Well, I'd like you to draw the back cover too."
Oh.
And he ran down the whole scenario.
Yeah.
The rocket
Yeah.
with the pinhead and
Yeah. Yeah.
the world map,
Right.
details, all that. So that was a fun job. But again, I had to do it in
A
a
lot of
couple
work.
of days. And you got to research things like, what does the Capitol building look like?
Right.
What do these different areas look like? And you couldn't get on your web browser and find all the images instantly. You kind of
Yeah.
had to dig to find these images. So
So tell us
good
about
old days.
tell us about Punk Magazine, because you were a big part of this. Tell us about what was going on then in this magazine influence. It's a very big influence on the punk. I had to get a copy all the time. This is something in my life, being involved with Sire Records. Tell us about Punk Magazine.
Yeah, well, you're holding up one of my favorite covers that I did. That was Punk
Oh,
number 12, came
love
out
this
in
cover.
late 77. That's Robert Gordon on the cover. He'd left a band called Tough Darts that were kind of a pick to click in the early days of CBGBs. They had some very commercial songs. But Robert went out on his own and started a band with Link Ray, the great guitar player
Yeah.
that a lot of people know now from his hit song Rumble.
Mhm.
Did a lot of other great
Right.
stuff. Great instrumental guitar player from the 50s. And Robert was doing kind of rockabilly in 1950s songs. I love that stuff, and that cover actually sold pretty well.
Wow.
But we really started the magazine in 1975, and I got inspired to start a magazine about the CBGB scene and emerging punk rock and Iggy. And I was always a big fan of what we call punk rock, the New York Dolls, etc. So I saw the Ramones in August of 75. And then a friend had the money to put up, Jed Dunn Jr., so we started to put together a magazine. The first thing we did was go to CBGB's to interview the Ramones for the cover.
Right.
And then Danny Fields, the manager, says, Lou Reed's in the audience. Do you want to talk to him? And Metal Machine Music, his double album of feedback, noise, and distortion had just come out.
Wow.
And it shocked the music world.
Right.
And I loved that record because it was such an, FU statement.
Yeah.
And I got to talk to him. He gave me all night to talk to him. He didn't tell me to leave. I left on my own. I ran out of things to ask him. It was great. Very generous of Lou.
Yeah.
Gave me a great interview that put the magazine on the map because I mixed up photos of him with comic strip drawings illustrating what his stories were, and people flipped for it. And then we had this great centerfold in the first issue of the Ramones with some great photographs, and Mary Harron, who's now a famous film director, wrote the story. So I just got very lucky and had some very talented people. Oh man, Helen, you're bringing up Helen.
Yeah.
She wrote lyrics for Blue Oyster Cult, as did Richard Meltzer, who was really the original punk rock critic before Lester Bangs. He was the biggest influence on punk rock in the early 70s. So she wrote lyrics, Meltzer and Patti Smith.
Wow.
Blue Oyster Cult's management also discovered the Dictators. And they were like,
wow.
The Ramones and Dictators were the first two New York City punk bands. So, yeah, we met Helen. We had her star in our first feature-length photo comic. And I was good friends with Helen. And just saw a YouTube video. Al Bouchard did a little background on Helen. She was an amazing person. She brought out her own music. And that drawing was by R. Crumb.
Yeah.
Disposable Devo's great. That's something Chris Stein and Deborah Harry put together on their own. And we just added some captions and some noise to the photos.
This is
and Debbie appeared in more issues of Punk than anybody else.
Really? Wow.
It was like an editor for us. He was always sending us material, always helping out. We published a lot of his photographs. Great guy to work with.
Yeah.
Always a big Blondie fan. And people say they were a pop band. They're not really punk. Well,
I always found Chris, they're very approachable. I always felt whenever I meet them, Chris is wonderful. Debbie's always wonderful. How are you? They're very open people. And you know that, John. Let me get into also your book. Now, this will lead into your punk book, right? Because the punk book was punk. I mean, the punk book. You should tell us. Yes. Tell us about that.
Here's my punk book.
Yeah.
We take a lot of, we take almost all the best material ever published. Oh, geez. Yeah, here's a good one. Our masterpiece was Mutant Monster Beach Party. And it starred Debbie Harry and Joey. Joey plays a surfer. You see, he's got the surfboard. She's in a sports car. Shot on the streets of New York City and Coney Island. If anybody can find my YouTube channel, I think I put up Muscle Beach Party. You can
Mm-hmm.
just watch like a
Yeah.
slideshow of it. But yeah, we only lasted 3.5 years, but we were there for the peak of the punk rock movement, late 75 to the middle of 1979. You know, the Iranian hostage crisis took over right when Newsweek was about to put The Clash on the cover, and
Yeah.
we were hoping that punk rock would get a second wave.
Yeah, so the question is, in the aftermath of working on Punk Magazine and then seeing, where the music industry is heading, where music is heading, what are things that you're working on now, and where do you see punk music going to? Where is it evolving towards and heading towards in this newly remade industry that we have today?
Oh, well, I gotta say, once Punk Magazine went out of business in 1979, I felt kind of kicked to the curb by the music industry, and I really got into video games, and that became my new passion. So I was playing Space Invaders, Donkey Kong, all the great early arcade games, and reviewing them for Heavy Metal Magazine,
Yeah.
which was not a music magazine, comic art magazine. And currently, I don't pay too much attention to music. I listen to old stuff. I'm almost 70 years old, so right now I'm working on my autobiography, and I'm going to try to tell the story of everything I was up to before I started Punk Magazine, because people think I grew up in Connecticut and then we moved to New York to start the magazine, but I was here for a while, and I studied under the two greatest comic book artists of all time, Will Eisner and Harvey Kurtzman, and had quite a few adventures. I was almost published by the National Lampoon. Back then they were doing the National Lampoon Hour, and that's when John Belushi and Chevy, the whole Saturday Night Live crew got together. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was a really interesting time in New York.
Yeah.
Punk rock was kind of the end of the line, although the East Village art scene started after the magazine went out of business. And that was kind of all these kids reading Punk Magazine, moving to New York City to start a band and to become an artist. So,
Well, where did the name punk evolve from, John?
which what?
The name punk. Where did that evolve from? The name punk.
Where did we get the word from?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I read Cream Magazine, and Cream Magazine was always talking about punk and punks, and so I thought everybody knew what it was. So we called, punk
Oh, okay.
magazine punk, because I
Yeah.
asked Jed Dunn and a friend of his, well, what do I call? They didn't like the first names I came up with, and I said, what do I call a magazine about punk rock? Why don't you just call it punk?
Punk. Right.
And I thought, perfect, four-letter
Yeah.
word, like life, time. The good magazine titles are one word.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's good to know those little facts, because people always ask, where did that name come from? How do you feel about music today yourself? I mean, do you listen
Totally
to music
sucks.
today?
What? It's so bad. I can't listen to modern music. It hurts my ears. It's as bad as the prog rock kind of stuff that was being pushed on us in the 70s, with computers replacing instruments, and now it's all just digitized noise. It's horrible. I miss the old days when people were in the studio, and you could sometimes they'd play a little bit of them talking in the studio, or something would go wrong and they'd leave it on the tape. Everything's perfect now. Everything's boring. Everything's just, programmed.
Yeah, I'm working with a group now. Judith and I are doing incredible vinyl with this cartoonist, in fact, that we were with. But anyway, it's vinyl, and vinyl is getting a resurgence. I'm involved with the Making Vinyl event, if you don't know. And what he wants, it's very interesting. It's like we're doing a cover, but it's printed overseas, and we've got to have legal lines. And so he said, wait a minute, I like the artwork. So I'm going to print a number of these covers without any legal lines or barcodes, limited edition. And it's like kind of like in this era now, there's some old things like vinyl and even album covers coming back. That's the good thing. And this group is kind of like, I wouldn't say Ramones, but they're a mixture of very good musicians. Some played with Iggy Pop, Nirvana. It's a great album, recordings of years ago. So that's a good one. So I said, hey, I had to work. But I do agree with you. A lot of the music today is kind of like noise, I call it. And so you got to sift through it. But I always found there's a couple of, like Joseph Arthur, there's a couple of musicians that are kind of like, but you're right. I mean, it's a lot of noise, a lot of noise.
It's funny you mentioned the vinyl thing, because a punk rock record store opened up right next door to me, and they sell only vinyl. I can't find a CD in my neighborhood. All the record stores
sell
that's vinyl.
Great. I love that.
Vinyl outsold CDs. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I have old CDs now that don't work.
Wow.
There's something called CD rot. They're no good after a while. A vinyl record you could play forever.
Yeah, and the sound. I mean, that's what makes it coming back, is the sound. And it's so glad for me to know that musicians see that. They're not, and that's kind of like this old thing coming back, but thank God, in some way, John, vinyl.
I don't understand. I got 10 ears. So I listen to music on, like a car radio, and it sounds the same to me as an expensive stereo.
Right, got it.
Like the expensive stereo was a big thing in the 70s and 80s. People would spend thousands of dollars on, like, for instance, Lou Reed. When we talked about Metal Machine music, I mentioned to him that I had it on quadraphonic stereo.
Wow.
Quadraphonic was this thing in the 70s where instead of 2 speakers, you would have 4 speakers.
Wow.
The front and the back and the left and the right. Didn't take off, but I really wanted to get that quadraphonic LP from me.
You got I got like a $500 turntable. It's really good, and I hook it up to Bose speakers, and wow, the sound is great. I don't think you need to spend thousands of dollars today because there's a lot of I think you just get a regular, very good though turntable, and hook it up to Bose speakers, and you're in another zone. John.
Yeah, I just have a little cheap $70 turntable with a little speaker.
Yeah.
And all my CDs, all of my CD drives and players are broken. They're so cheap.
You know what I did? I just turned down a job. You love this, on a plastic jewel box, because I hate the plastic jewel box. So the designer, the musician asked me, he said, okay, Spence, I understand. I did the vinyl, but I turned down the CD jewel box, John, because I couldn't deal with it. I hate the jewel box. I just don't like the plastic jewel box,
That's funny you mentioned that, because I didn't get asked to do another record cover after Road to Ruin for almost 15 years.
Really?
I did one for Murphy's Law, Best of Times.
Mm-hmm.
And I did this very complicated record cover. But that was when everything was just starting to move to cassette tape and CD. So when it shrank down, it lost all its impact. It was not a good record cover anymore.
Yep.
It's really difficult to create artwork that's attention grabbing for a little jeweled CD box.
I know. I I totally agree. And also, I like the 45 though, which is very popular right now. I'm working on that on something. That's you start with the 45 size, the 7-inch. That's where your eye sort of accepts a larger size art. And there's a lot of great stuff. I collect a lot of 45 stuff. I did a whole interview series on HD on 45s and LPs, but the 7-inch is very interesting, John.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Spencer, I've done a bunch of CD covers, done a few vinyl covers. More often than not, I was asked to design the record label on the record.
Yeah.
That little round thing.
Yeah.
Like when Chris Stein started Ammo Records, he asked me to help design the company logo, the emblem.
Oh, yeah.
And I hand lettered records, LPs for Iggy Pop, Zombie Birdhouse, the Gun Club, and some other bands that Chris was producing back then. I did a label for Adrenaline OD. They did. You remember Mountain did Theme from an Imaginary?
Oh, yeah. Imaginary Western.
Yeah, well, they did a song called Theme from an Imaginary Midget Western.
Yeah.
And then I did another job for a band called Artless. And I drew the singer, Michael Board, right? I did this caricature of him behind an American flag. And they etched it into the vinyl. It wasn't a picture disc.
Really?
It was carved into the back side of the 12-inch LP.
Wow.
Which,
you
know,
did
has been done other times. I don't know if he was the first, but I'm always doing like very unusual stuff for music.
Well, you have a very famous 45 that actually shown. I don't know if you saw it. I sent it to you. It's the HD, one of the part of our HD TV series on. We did 145s. Your sleeve. It's a great story because I had to get your Blitzkrieg Bop 45 sleeve, and you couldn't get it on eBay. I told Seymour Stein. I said, Seymour, I'm trying to buy this, John's Blitzkrieg Bop. And he says, good luck. He said to me, good luck, Spencer. Anyway, I found it. I actually outbid somebody. I bought it for about $100. I showed it on the show. It's beautiful. It's the, the Blitzkrieg Bop sleeve that was, I believe, printed in Europe. It's beautiful, black and white, with your artwork, drawing, lettering. I love it. It's one of my favorites in my collection.
Well, thank you, Spencer. That actually was originally the centerfold for Punk number 3.
With the pictures.
We did a story on the Ramones recording their first album.
Wow.
So Danny Fields had taken the photographs of the Ramones live, and then I just wrote balloons with the lyrics in them. And the Ramones were stuck. You know how it was for those guys back then. They never had a big budget for anything. Like, whenever you worked for the Ramones, you were like what they call working for scale, like minimum wage.
Well, I got to tell you, you don't know this, but I don't think I ever told you, or a lot of people. When I worked with Sire, I wasn't getting paid a lot. It was more like I was thrown in. It was more for my portfolio. Lucky I could live because I was doing book jackets on the side. But I really was going to pay that. So John Gillespie calls me up one day, the art director, Spencer, I don't understand it. Seymour Stein pays your checks before anybody else in the office. I said, yeah, John, my rates are so low. Of course he's going to pay me first. No.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how things, I guess they still work today. Somebody was telling me the other day that I mean, the markets in publishing and print have dried up, but you can get paid for stuff online, and you start at the bottom and work your way up, like all over again. But yeah, the Ramones came to me about the Blitzkrieg Bop, and they asked if they could use the poster on the front and the back of their first single.
Yeah.
And they couldn't afford to pay me any money. And I was like, no, great, do it. I had my first record cover.
Yeah.
What's not
Yeah.
to like?
That's
So,
what my attitude was too. I just came off a very small indie jazz label, ESP Disc, and they had nothing. Lettering cost. I mean, they had very minimal type. I even had something to present, but as soon as I got thrown into Sire, they let me do whatever I wanted in some way with type and design. I never. Nothing ever changed, believe it or not. All the covers went through, from Fear of Music to Ramones to whatever I worked on. So they were kind of a great label, because if you did good work, they appreciated it, right? But of course, they didn't charge that much, so of course they loved me. But in a sense, the designs were good. Very happy. Now look at it, John. You and I were involved with, like, the Ramones were iconic, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame later in life, and so many other great things. But your work I've always admired. I was
yeah,
very
but
honored to know you as an artist, as a cartoonist and artist. High respect.
well, thank you, Spencer. Thank you very much. But I'm okay. But it's funny, like what we used to call the counterculture or the underground.
Yeah.
That's what it was like to work for Sire Records, or some, like, there were underground magazines. I can't
Yeah.
even say
Yeah.
on the air here because they're dirty words. But they paid a decent amount, but not as much as the slick mainstream
Right.
publications.
Right.
But a lot of us weren't able to adapt. Like when you work for the bigger companies, you often have to take a lot of orders,
Mm.
and they make you jump through hoops, and you
Right.
have to do this, that, and the other thing before you get published. Whereas, as you said, working for a Sire Records or a punk magazine, you had freedom. You had artistic freedom. And once you taste that, it's
Right.
very difficult to wear the chains that the mainstream wants you to wear when you're working for them.
Yeah, exactly. I really agree with you. I mean, the freedom to the artist, what you're talking about, is so important. Creativity, not having someone look over your shoulder, changing things, as we talk about. It's like, and then all I remember is I did something, put it in, it got printed, and that's it. I really was spoiled, actually, I guess. But I guess they appreciated my work. But sometimes you didn't have to say anything. You knew right away if something was taken in, printed. You don't have to say anything. They know you liked your work. And you did some great stuff. I mean, it's like people like us are very fortunate.
Well, that was a very special time, the 70s and 80s in New York City. When you look at, like, the most famous people who come out of the art scene, Keith Haring and Basquiat, and their work sells for millions of dollars, and their work is evocative of those times.
Mhm.
It's pretty amazing because at the time, nobody liked punk rock. Nobody liked the Ramones.
Right.
I mean, you would say, yeah, I work for the Ramones. They'd go, oh, man, they suck. What do you work for them for? And, oh, punk? Ew. Ripped jeans? You got to be kidding me. Now I
Yeah.
walk down the street and every other woman has
Right.
short
That's fun.
jeans. People wearing CBGBs or Ramones t-shirts and don't even know what that. There was a band called the Ramones or a club named CBGBs. They just like the way it looks.
Yeah.
So
I mean, Seymour always, this, Seymour always backed the Ramones. I remember when I told Seymour that we were in the MoMA collection with the Ramones poster, and he gave me the most beautiful letter he sent me. And he said, you guys were the few guys that loved the Ramones, meaning we were the few that really backed them as people. And he had to fight Warner Brothers. They didn't know what the hell he was doing anyway. Warner's didn't know what Seymour was signing or doing. But it is incredible. I mean, I know you must have had. I mean, I didn't find any. I met the Ramones a couple of times. I always had a good relationship with Joey and Johnny and Dee later. I did his hip hop album with Judith, with Bob Gruen. But I always found them okay with me. And I'm sure with you, in a way, relationship, you have to have that. but they were a pretty raucous group. I would figure, it might have been not that easy for other people. Is that right, John? You know what I'm saying? Because of their nature or stuff, or what? Or did you find them friendly? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, well, I became very good friends with the Ramones
Yeah.
after we became the first media outlet that really put them on the map. Because Punk Magazine was all over the place in 76, 77, 78. And of course, the records were selling, the records that I did work for sold really well.
Yeah.
So I was good friends with them, but over the years, things got more strained. I wasn't Mr. Punk Magazine anymore. I was just another guy. And I got too busy to hang out and go see their shows.
Yeah.
I mean, when you got to work for a living, you can't be up at a club till 4 a.m. and then get up for work for your 9 to 5.
Yeah.
So,
One thing I want to ask you is, in your early life, were you influenced by artists? Like, I was very influenced by Mad Magazine, Don Martin, that whole thing. When I was growing up, did you have influences of people you looked, kind of like influence you in your artwork or looked up to?
Oh, well, that's what I was saying earlier. I went to School of Visual Arts.
Yeah.
And my teachers were Will Eisner and Harvey Kurtzman. Now,
Oh,
Harvey started Mad
God.
Magazine.
Right, exactly. Wow.
His proteges, like people he worked with, who you later might have heard of, included like Terry Gilliam,
Yep.
film director who did Brazil and
Right.
12 Monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
R. Crumb,
Mm-hmm.
who a lot of
Wow.
us consider the greatest comic book artist of all time. Gilbert Shelton, Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. He was influential on so many different people.
Jeez.
Gloria Steinem worked for him.
Wow.
Where she started Ms. Magazine. So Harvey was a big influence on me.
Yeah.
After I left school, he got me freelance work. I worked at Bananas magazine, thanks to him.
Mm-hmm.
That was a job I held for 10 years.
Wow.
And the money I made from working at Bananas was paying the rent, so I could afford to lose money and waste time putting out Punk.
Yeah.
So,
And
Harvey was my biggest influence, both as an artist and a person.
You have anything else you'd like to say that would add to this interview that you want people to know about, or?
Let's see. Oh, one of the things I've done recently
Good.
is for a clothing store called Metropolis.
Oh.
They're over on 11th, between 11th and 12th Street on Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this huge rock and roll and vintage t-shirt store. And they put together a special John Holmstrom dressing room all the way in the back.
Oh my God, that's incredible.
So I painted the door in the style of Rocket to Russia.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And basically it's like the story of Metropolis and punk rock and John Holmstrom. And
oh, that's great.
Stuck a bunch of other stuff on there. My comic book characters. I've had 3 comic book characters. Joe, as I mentioned, I did him for Bananas magazine, where I worked with a guy named Jovial Bob Stein, who went to the dark side about 10 years later and turned into R.L. Stein of Goosebumps.
Oh.
So he went from being a funny guy who made you laugh to the scary guy who scares little kids.
Oh, God.
And then I did like a cannabis cat character called Hep Cat for High Times. And that led to me working there full time for lucky 13 years. And then I did a guy called Bosco.
Yeah, I have that. I have a comic book.
Character.
I have a Bosco comic book. I still have it.
Yeah, it's didn't work out too good, but Comics is a lot of work, and as you get older, it takes more time. So that's why I'm concentrating on my book with stories about New York City in the early '70s, because it was a rough place, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. Once the COVID thing happened, it seemed like half the city moved out.
Right.
Right? It was too
Right.
much. Like,
It's
it's not
right.
nice like it used to be. And all these people
Yeah.
are always saying, I wish I could have lived in New York in the
Right.
70s.
Right.
You know, it sounded like it was really interesting.
Right. Right.
But what's kind of interesting here is half the building I live in the East Village, was empty
Oh, wow.
6 months ago. Now it's almost full.
Wow.
But the landlords dropped the price. Spencer, you wouldn't believe how much somebody got. A nice
Unbelievable.
3-bedroom.
Wow.
Monthly.
Wow.
Yes.
150. I don't know.
Close. 1,500.
50. Wow. That's incredible.
Guy next door to me, it was listed for 1,800.
Oh, wow.
So the smart landlords are doing whatever they have to get people back in New York, which is great.
That is good. I like to hear that. Nobody talks about that. That's great. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Let's hope the store rents come down and we get bars and restaurants back up, because almost every bar and restaurant in my neighborhood is kaput.
Did you frequent CBGBs a lot? I mean, I know you did,
Did I what?
maybe. Did you frequent CBGBs a lot? Did you know Hilly?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I moved to my apartment on East 10th Street so I could walk to CBGB's.
Oh, wow.
So
I like that.
at times I was there like at least once a week,
Wow.
sometimes a few times a week. It was like my office. In 1976, Joey and I would hang out at the bar, and we would just like field visits from the media, because all these people heard about punk rock and the CBGB scene. So somebody talked to me, and they'd say, "Can you get me in touch with Joey Ramone?" And Joey'd be like right next to me. I'd say, "Here he is," and then he'd do the same for us. People wanted to know about Punk magazine.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah, I was there a lot, but I stopped hanging out, like I said, in around '79.
Yeah.
The Mud Club opened up.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of forgotten now, but that's really where, like, Keith Haring and the East Village art scene kind of started up. That and Club 57, which also had a show at the Museum of Modern Art.
Mm-hmm.
A drawing I did for a cartoon concert I did with my character Joe, which I performed at Club 57, was on the same wall as some work that Keith Haring did.
Oh, great.
Then. And Kenny Scharf had a whole room at MoMA. So it's kind of interesting how all this stuff was percolating at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got to know Hilly. I knew him back in the day, but in the '70s, Hilly worked all day. So by night, he'd be asleep on the couch.
Right.
And we would deal with Merv. If you ever see the CBGB movie that got banned by all the critics,
I know.
it's
Yeah.
actually pretty like accurate when it comes to the dynamic of how the club operated. Merv was really Hilly's right hand. Lisa, his daughter, was involved. So I worked on that movie, and I'm very proud. They were great. The director and writer team were great to work with. The set was wonderful. They actually brought me down to set to watch the scenes of me interviewing Lou Reed and the rest of it.
Wow. Yeah.
But I got to know Hilly better as in the 2000s. I would walk down CBGB's and pop in and say hello. And I developed a very nice relationship with Hilly. He was a really wonderful guy.
Yeah.
He attended one meeting when we got the Joey Ramone street sign put up at 2nd and the Bowery. Originally, the crew from New York was going to put the sign up in front of CBGB's.
Mm.
Hilly specifically wanted that space reserved. He wants Hilly Crystal Place someday.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully that'll happen.
Yeah, yeah, they should. I mean, it was such a foundation of the culture. Um, it's like I talked to him once, and I said, "Hilly, you ought to do a book." But he had problems with putting together a book. You know what I mean? It's like there were certain people, you know, in the village or something. He was one of them. Like, put a book together, Hilly. But there are other books that came out on punk or around that era, but Hilly never did that book, which I thought would have been incredible. You know, John?
Well, he did a photo book, and
Yeah.
David Byrne did the introduction.
I have that, I think.
And you know, who needs a book when you got a movie?
Right. Right.
I mean, the CBGB movie is pretty much the story of Hilly, and I think that's why a lot of people don't relate to it because they didn't know Hilly.
Mm.
Although I think Alan Rickman did a pretty good job, and they had all these A-list actors in it.
Mm-hmm.
The whole budget for the movie was only a couple $1 million,
Yeah.
but all these people just loved punk and the CBGB scene so much they wanted to be in the movie.
In the movie, sure.
Nothing.
Sure.
I think
Mhm.
Rupert Grint spent, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars appearing in the movie because he got paid next to nothing. He played Cheetah Chrome,
Mm-hmm.
and he flew people in, and you know, had a good time. And that's what it's all about. And that's what Hilly didn't do anything to create the scene except to allow it to happen
Mm-hmm.
and provide this wonderful club where people would have a good time and enjoy music. And I don't remember which punk said this from London, but they said, you know, the London scene had better bands. We had, you know, better this and better that. But New York had CBGBs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, you know, that I think is pretty accurate. You know, that's why we had a punk scene. Even though Max's had bands play at their club, it wasn't really a hangout.
Yeah. Yeah.
At CBGB's, people would go there to see the music and then hang out.
Yeah.
And so you developed a whole community of people working together. We didn't all like each other. We didn't all like each other's music,
Mm-hmm.
but it was just this place where you could make it happen on your own. You could start a band and make things happen. And that's what happened later when the Dead Boys showed up, B-52s, Devo played CBGB, so many bands, I mean, into the 80s. I'm spacing out. Biggest rap band of all time, Beastie Boys.
Right.
I think they played a residency at CBGB's for like a year before they hit big. So
It's like the Bowery Electric is that club now that's kind of revived in some way the punk bands, and they had for a number of years the Ramones revival type thing, or you know, dedications after a certain number of years to an album coming out. And I talked there a couple of times. I found that the Bowery Electric is a place where these punk groups are now kind of frequenting or playing, and similar to CB's but different, but still that's the place where a lot of the punkers go play, I believe, you know.
well, Jesse Malin,
Yeah.
who used to be in a band called Degeneration,
Yeah.
and you know currently performs on his own as Jesse Malin, is the owner of the club, and he owns
Right.
several other places in New York City. In the Bar Niagara. He had a place called Coney Island Baby, and these places are all in limbo until the COVID things work out.
Yeah.
Of course, he wasn't qualified for a loan to keep his businesses open. Although, you know, all these other rotten people, like the National Basketball Association got money from the government.
Right.
It's outrageous because a
Oh,
small
God, that's
business
horrible.
like Jesse needed the money.
And Jesse's such a supporter. He's such
Jesse
a
has put his
supporter.
money where his mouth is, and he has kept the spirit of New York rock alive like you said, at Bowery Electric.
Yeah, I mean, he's such a supporter of musicians. I met him so many times. We're very good friends, and I always support him. And I know he would support you. He probably supports you. It's like he helps people in need, and he also is a wonderful person. And I'm so glad to know him. And he is a foundation for a lot of musicians, helping to showcase musicians. And he has a very good, has very good lineups at Bowery, and it's a good club, right?
He's been doing live streams from the Bowery Electric. He did the Sylvain Memorial Tribute
Yeah,
a few weeks ago.
I saw that. Yeah.
And he's going to be doing the upcoming Joey Ramone birthday bash on May 19th.
Yeah.
And this year marks 20 years
Wow.
since Joey passed away, and the first Joey Ramone birthday bash took place at the Hammerstein Ballroom,
Oh, wow.
which held thousands of people.
Oh, that's incredible.
And I helped host a small press event before the show began.
Mm.
And Jesse talked and revealed that Joey Ramone put up the money for D-Generation's first demos.
Wow.
Like, he got nothing out of it,
Yeah.
but he was so generous and so interested in promoting New York bands and kind of paying it forward. So, he knew he got some breaks, so he made sure some other bands would get a break
Yeah.
to get their music out there. So he would host live events and have a bunch of bands play, and that's how the New York City punk rock scene became what it was.
Yeah, and we're bringing up something that's interesting. There's really a crossover from Hilly and Jesse. Both of them very supportive of new musicians, having music heard. They're very similar, right, in that respect. And I like that. We need that more, right, John?
I'll give you a contrast. I've heard that in LA, the clubs force the bands to sell all the tickets.
Really?
Like, it's pay to play.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, you got to rent the space
Oh,
and then
geez.
sell tickets to cover the
Oh my
cost.
God.
Yeah. I mean, bands did not make a lot of money in CBGBs
Right.
because the admission was only a couple of bucks.
Right.
But the money went to the band, and Hilly made the money off the bar.
Mm.
It was a nice long bar.
It was. I remember that bar, John. You walked in, it was on the right side. You had the tables on the left. You had a long thing, and then the stage. And I remember the bathroom, John, the bathrooms. The bathroom with all the writing.
Bathrooms, Spencer.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were there this early, but in '76 they were upstairs.
Oh, I didn't know
And they were
that.
behind
Okay.
where the stage was, and the stage was tiny.
Mm.
It only was lifted up off the floor by a couple of inches, and there was barely room for the Ramones, much less a band like Blondie. They had like 5, 6 people. But Hilly, in spring of '77, built the new stage.
Mm.
And they used to serve hamburgers and chili at a kitchen in the back, and they turned that into dressing rooms.
Mm.
And then he moved the bathrooms downstairs.
Yeah.
And they weren't bad, except that people kept destroying them, and Hilly would never spend money to fix them.
Mm. Amazing.
Hilly was so thrifty, it made the place interesting, too,
Mm.
because he never renovated the place. And I saw this, Seymour Stein's daughter, Mandy, made a documentary film
Yeah, I was
about
there.
CBGBs.
Yeah, I saw that. I
And
saw
it
that.
only played the festival circuit. I don't think
Right.
it's ever been released.
No, it hasn't. You're right. It hasn't.
And in it, Luke Sante, who wrote a great book about New York City's, underground culture and the 19th century popular culture, examined the CBGBs and determined that part of the bar belonged to a 19th century Bowery saloon.
Mm.
It was the last remaining relic from those days.
Wow.
Because, you know, the whole story of New York City. Remember, CBGBs had the big posters of like Al Jolson
Yeah,
and
right.
you know all these vaudeville stars.
Yeah, right, right.
You had been forgotten,
Yeah.
and they were surrounded the stage. I mean, but that was the spirit of the Bowery, and
Yeah.
that's why we love New York. There's so much history of New York City. They put up these posters about what happened in the Bowery. You know, the first baseball clubs were founded on the Bowery. Harry Houdini
Mm-hmm.
started on the Bowery. W.C. Fields, Irving Berlin was a singing waiter. All that stuff began in the Bowery.
That I did not know.
Tattoo parlors, the first American tattoo parlor on the Bowery.
Mm.
The number of popular culture events and personalities
Mm-hmm.
from the 19th to 20th century all started in the Bowery.
Wow.
This was the center of the world. Then Hollywood started and it moved to Los Angeles. But
Well, CBGB's was that club, you know, with along others. But I'm glad you mentioned the Mud Club because that was another big foundation club. They had a lot of people that gathered there that were very instrumental. John, you brought up some very good stuff, and thank you so much for being on.
Do you have a website or anything you'd like to give to if you want to direct traffic to your website or social media?
updates will be on johnholmstrom.com and punkmagazine.com has a lot about the book. It's the last time I updated it, like 8 years ago. But the book's great. It's only $30, 650 pages.
Incredible book. I had John on our radio show when the book was published. Phenomenal book. I got to recommend that to everybody. You got to get this book. I mean, it's,
thank you, Spencer.
Yep, it's art and the culture
thank you,
in this book.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you for having me on.